When Gunal asked me to speak about the U.S. policy toward the Kurds, my first question usually is which ones? We've heard largely, Mohammed did so eloquently, talk about the Kurdistan region, but there are 25 to 30 million Kurds across 4 large states, the majority of whom are in Turkey. So when we talk about U.S. policy toward the Kurds, we need to say which ones and at what period in time, because this becomes far more complicated than looking at a an Iraqi Kurdish Washington dialectic. I'm not going to make any arguments. I'm not an advocate for or against Kurds, but I do want to look at some of the tenets of the way that the U.S. government, and I qualify U.S. government because, as you know, there's the Congress. What was introduced the other day is, I would say, some type of controversial bill that was proposed. And then different facets of the government. But I'm going to look at official U.S. policy, not those of some congressmen. So there will be, and then we can possibly answer some of Dan's questions about oil, and that'll come out of it. I don't agree that the story has not been as rosy, in my view, as Mohammed has indicated. The region's about $17 billion in debt, and the oil gamble has been a catastrophe for local populations, and the region is quite destabilized. So, but nonetheless, we can talk about that later. What are some of the assumptions and premise of U.S. policy toward the Kurds? What are the continuities and changes, and what do I see as some of the challenges moving forward? Some of the presumptions and the premise has been the Westphalian state system. That is to say, I'm not going to give a whole history, but this is based on nation states, governments dealing with other nation states. So up to at least 1991, again, as Mohammed indicated, in the Gulf War, we were dealing with the states in which the Kurds have been part of. So you have the Kurds in Iraq, the Kurds were in Turkey, Iran, and Syria. Nonetheless, secondly, so that was a state issue. And then as the nature of the state or the sovereignty regime has changed over time, slightly been weakened, this is where you see the opportunities for direct or more direct relationships with the Kurds have emerged. And again, different Kurdish groups I'll qualify. Secondly, this is based on U.S. strategic interests. Some can say the word pawns. I don't think the United States has necessarily used the Kurds as pawns, but nonetheless, what are our strategic interests in a very geopolitically sensitive area, region? Changing threat perceptions and alliance structures. And third, we have to look at the Kurds. I know it's easy to say, look at the Kurdistan region, isn't it wonderful? But this is a relative. It's a great study in relativism. The Kurdistan region's stable relative to Baghdad. It's a great ally, but we have a landlocked region with Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Gulf states. So when we're looking at our relationship with the Kurds, I wouldn't say it's just how we look at this emergent non-state actor, but how does that function as a part of our other relationships in the region? And those 3 premises has shaped some of our policy. So I'll argue, if there's an argument, as the traditional states, and some of these states have weakened in the Middle East, particularly Iraq and Syria, this has created these ungoverned spaces or opportunity structures in which Kurdish groups, non-state actors, can benefit. The Kurds in Iraq have benefited the greatest, and since the anti-ISIS campaign, you've seen groups in Turkey also taking advantage of these political and strategic or security vacuums. Nonetheless, how have these consumptions played out? One, there hasn't been a clear U.S. policy. Because U.S. policy has been grounded in state-to-state relations, dealing with the Kurds have been a function of the problems of each state within. And that is a function of the United States' relationship with each of these central governments. That meant, what did that turn into? It meant that we had different approaches to the Kurds. There were good Kurds and there were bad Kurds, right? The Iraqi Kurds were the good Kurds. They were fighting against Saddam. They became part of coalitions to fight and overthrow Saddam. They became part of fighting against Ansar, and so be it. And now the same goes to the anti-ISIS campaign. In Turkey, it was far more complex. This evolved from the post-Cold War. The Kurds in Turkey became part of a leftist movement. It was a far more violent movement. Turkey is a strong United States ally, a NATO member. So that those relationships that emerged and developed between the United States and Iraqi Kurds did not emerge with the Kurds in Turkey. The Kurds in Turkey are still considered a terrorist group, and that relationship has still affected how far this group can emerge as an actor. And find this, then with that, I'm not going to get into the Syrian Kurds until post-ISIS, and Iranian Kurds we'll leave aside for now. There's different legitimizing structures that have emerged with this, so that some of this has gone from clandestine support to, again, creating different opportunities. And that came when? When was the big change? 1991, in my view, when you had, after the Gulf War, you had the weakening of the Iraqi state. I was part of Operation Provide Comfort too, when we had the safe haven. So this was a time, again, when even when the Kurdistan regional government formed, I first went over at that time in 1992, this was where the state no longer had its reach. This is what I think we should be looking at, that the Iraqi central government could no longer get into the Kurdistan region, and so you had the emergence of more direct relationships, still on a humanitarian mission. So you had these very distinct relationships. With that, you had, again, changes over time in, I'm going to move up now to post-2003. Further weakening of the Iraqi state. What was different at this time was now the Kurdistan region became a legitimate structure. It wasn't just the Kurdistan region self-declared by its own elections, but part of a federal Iraqi state, a constitution, and in my view, that gave the Kurds three things: legitimacy, rights, revenues, and recognition. And it was from that constitutional arrangement that a more broad-based relationship and direct relationship between the United States and the Kurdistan regional government of one emerged. That's one part of it. The other part of it, again, was black gold, oil. So the Kurdistan region was also, through this new constitutional arrangement, able to engage in some of these, let's call it quasi-state building activities, and Mohammed's discussed all of that. I don't want to get into, again, all of the things that the Kurds have been able to do, but building a lobby has been extremely effective for the Kurds. And when you ask about U.S. state relations, you're going to see one part of the U.S. government. I think it's a mistake to think, because some congressmen keep drafting bills, that this is a change in U.S. policy. As far as my reading was yesterday, the White House made it clear that the U.S. policy toward Iraq remains unchanged, that the United States is committed to territorial integrity of Iraq. So we have to be very careful about what some draft bills say and what some congressmen want to do and what is official U.S. policy. Nonetheless, there have been overtures. There have been direct business relations with the Kurds, again, because this was part of what's considered as part of the Iraqi state. Now, what are some, and again, we saw this in another opportunity, which is the post-ISIS campaign. One of the big shifts I see is that for the first time, the bad Kurds have been semi-legitimized. They too are now this non-state actor of which the coalition has been tapping into to fight ISIS. So all of this would give the appearance that the Kurds are on the rise. This is going to be a change. We're now going to change our policy and start dealing directly with non-state actors. No, I don't think so. For some reasons. One, there's still a commitment to state sovereignty, no matter how weakened it has been. You've seen this in the oil gamble. I think, again, it's been, on one level, you can say it's been a success. The Kurds have got all this oil. By the way, the 500,000 barrels, half of which are Kirkuk's oil, which is being sold as Kirkuk oil. But nonetheless, I think that's been a catastrophic disaster for the region. Secondly, I think the geopolitical alliances that we just don't seem to be playing out in the media. Turkey matters, okay? Our regional relations matter. So that any of these ties that are developed with the Kurdistan regional government, which are important, will be evaluated in relation to our other partnerships and our other strategic interests. But there's a larger policy issue. So I think that there will be these relations that develop with these non-state actors, but the larger policy issue is, how are we going to address the emergence of these non-state actors, so that you do have, on the one hand, groups like the PYD in Syria, who we were not even working with years ago because they were considered part of the PKK, but now they're becoming coalition boots on the ground. The Kurds are coalition boots on the ground. How do you turn these local partnerships with non-state actors into some type of viable security alliance after ISIS? So how do you incorporate these alternative governance structures? I don't see this as the states are going to break apart, Sykes-Picot is over. I think this is very simplistic, and then therefore the Kurds are going to have a state. They're probably a middle ground. So therefore, we're not set up to deal institutionally with non-state actors. This is not a dichotomy between dealing with the Kurds and not. So what type of strategic partnerships does the United States want to develop? What do we want from the region? There is an increased recognition of the role of the Kurds, but again, in my view, the United States policy will still treat the Kurds as distinct entities within the states in which they live. And a final point, we rarely get into the divisions between the Kurds. We think of this as the United States and the Kurds. And when I say which ones, I don't just mean Iraq, Turkey, and Iran. I mean PUK, KDP. They are very, very divided right now. Even in terms of accessing military weapons. Most of it's going to the Barzani group. You've got other groups angry that they're not accessing it. So the Kurds have to get their house in order as well before you can, bang on the door of the United States and keep complaining that you're not getting heavy weapons directed to you. There are other non-state actors that the United States needs to and is assessing. Sunni Arab groups. What are the secondary consequences of directly arming the Kurds for the Kurds' own sake? This could have a very significant backlash on the Kurds and for our other partnerships. So these are very complicated questions. As we start getting into sub-state actors, it's not just about the United States and the one sub-state actor. What are the local dynamics in which these shifting alliance structures and balance of power will affect our strategic interests?
Okay, Yerevan Said from Ruda News Agency. I really don't think that, Kurdish politics is as divided as Washington politics. My question is for Denise. Why are you dismissing Kurds as opportunists?
Hi, Yerevan. Nice to see you again. I know you're referring to my Foreign Affairs article because I know some of the folks were not very happy with it. Nonetheless, look, there's a lot of opportunism. This is the politics of opportunism in post-ISIS Iraq or whatever in Syria. Again, and I have no dog in this fight, but if you take territories that you can't secure or pay for, someone's going to have to secure them for you. The coalition's not going to be the Air Force for the Kurds forever. So if all of these territories that the Kurds are being able to take, and they've extended far beyond the disputed territories in certain areas and oil fields, they're going to have to work that out with the Sunni Arabs and the communities that live there. So it's actually quite a dangerous policy, and I see this as, typical overstep. I mean, I think some of these problems never would have been there in the first place if you said, we don't really need to take these territories and we don't really need these territories. But you overstepped. So now you're in a mess, in a pickle, I would say, because many of the Sunni Arab communities that are from these areas can't go back. They're being put in detention centers. And again, I'm not blaming all the Kurdish leaders because they're making an effort. However, there's a lot of communities right now, not just the Kurds, saying that these are their territories, the Assyrians, the Yazidis. So, like I said, it's not about being opportunistic. It's about how are you going to pay for and secure and guard all of this extra land that they've taken. This is not the United States' responsibility to be the Air Force for the Kurds. So that's a problem that I still think it's going to happen, and that's due to political overstep. I do want to get to the oil question. When I say that, you can look at it two ways. In one way, people can say it's been fantastic, as Mohammed said, and he's right. I do not think that this figure that the oil ministry goes to 2 million and 1 million, this is silly. There's about 250 coming out from the Kurdish region that they would say in their area, and much of this is from Kirkuk, that the Kurds have control right now. It is being sold in Jahan as Kirkuk oil under the State Oil Marketing Organization of Iraq, SOMO. Okay, this is still considered Iraqi oil. Did it help the Kurdistan region bring in oil companies? Absolutely. Did it develop the region? Absolutely. But the gamble I'm talking about, let's see if we can circumvent Baghdad and get our tankers out to sea, this has been a disaster. Because none of the oil, I don't care what has been said, has been sold at full price. Oil prices have dropped. Out of 10 years, there hasn't been a sovereign wealth fund created that has nothing to do with Maliki or the Iraqi government. There is not a dime in the Kurdistan region. So even a month before ISIS came, and this has nothing to do with ISIS, the region was bankrupt. So now you have, and I'm concerned about the people, quite frankly, there's $17 billion in debt, and many people are not getting their civil salaries. So if you want to create a structure, a large government function, in which 72% of the budget is for civil servant salaries, you're going to have a problem. And we're hearing the same rentier state issues that have, that's when I say this. And I think finally, I'm going to hit Steve's question while I'm here. Look, Turkey has been essential. It's been brilliant for Turkey, whether Erdogan did this intentionally or not. The Kurds have become a client state in Iraq of Turkey. It's got their oil, it's got their money, they can't move anywhere. So some people said Erdogan didn't do this intentionally. Whatever he did right, because he's working with Baghdad. There's more oil coming out of the northern corridor than ever before. And I think Ankara has played that. The reason why the PYD can't be treated like the Iraqi Kurds is, like I said, these are four distinct problems. The territorial integrity of the Turkish state is sacrosanct. So the Iraqi Kurds, in my view, are not threatening the territorial integrity of Turkey. In Turkey's mind, the PYD, i.e. the PKK, still is. Mm-hmm. And I think as long as that issue of what the PKK or PYD wants, and as long as Turkey perceives this as threatening their territorial integrity, you're not going to have the similar policy.
Yeah, I think Denise wants to cross-examine.
No. No cross-examine. I got no dog in this fight. I do want to answer. Dan made a good point. Dan asked the question: can't the Kurds, having taken this territory, exchange land for oil with land for peace with Baghdad? Here's the issue. What has changed in this weakened Iraqi state, because we're not going to have the same Iraq as we once knew it, where the dialectic was the Kurds in Baghdad. Yes, there's the Baghdad-Erbil relationship, but this is now between the Kurds and the Sunni Arabs largely. Most of those, and this is why I find it so dangerous to say that, this is just the Kurds and it's mine. Most of those territories, and I'm not going to get into what's mine, this is largely Kurdish. The fact is, Sunni Arabs still claim this territory. Mosul is the heart of Sunni Arab nationalism. Some of those oil fields in Bashika are very, very dicey, where ExxonMobil is, and the Arab communities also claim that is theirs. When ExxonMobil signed that deal, what did the sons of Nineveh say? We will blow up this territory if you dare go near it. So the point is, there's still contention. There are many Shia saying, we don't need to do anything. We're not going to fight for the disputed territories. We know this is between the Sunni Arabs and the Kurds. So the Kurds now have a 1,000-kilometer border, and this goes back, Yerevan, if I was Kurdish, I would be very concerned about this. They got a 1,000-kilometer border with, i.e. former ISIS people, I don't know what you want to call it, but these are very angry people that once were working with the Kurds. So how this land for peace is going to work out, it's going to be with the Sunni Arabs. And that's also going to mean revenue sharing. If you want to take Kirkuk, then those revenues are going to have to be shared as well. So I think it's become far more complicated than the Kurds in Baghdad cutting a deal. And that goes to my other point is, I think we've so overdetermined this leverage. Every time Barzani says we're going to have an independent state, Washington is trembling. We have to look at this in regional perspective. I don't think it's the United States that's going to say the Kurds can have a state or not. Ask Turkey. Ask Iran. If tomorrow the Kurdistan region wanted a state with Erbil, Duhok, and Suleimania, they probably could get it. But will they be willing to accept a state without two key areas? That's parts of Mosul and Kirkuk. So that's the issue, is what would the borders look like, and will Arab Iraqis, who are pretty much still committed to their Iraqi entity, whatever, in what form, will they agree to that? And that's why you go back to how stable will this region be under the conditions that they're calling for a state. It's not Washington's choice to make. It's the regional states neighboring the Kurds.
Thank you, Denise. Let me take three more, one right here. Well, you had one before, right? No, let's take you. Oh, you didn't have one.
This John.
Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is John. I'm with the Turkish Embassy. First of all, I don't think that Syrian Kurds are equal to PYD. There are other Syrian Kurdish factions, parties. That's a fact. Second one, my knowledge is PYD was the reluctant part when Pesh wanted to move through Turkey into Kobani, not the other way around, because PYD did not want to work with first the opposition and the rest of the Kurdish parties, and I think not with the KRG. This is the other part of the story. And I'm glad that you addressed to the issue of the constitution, which is not raised, in this whole discussion, which identifies Iraq as a federal country. But the anomaly here is that it is a federal country with only one federal region. So this has been the problem all along.
John, it's good to see you again. But your point is well taken. Gundal's right. The Syrian Kurds and Mohammed, that the vast majority of influence is the PYD. However, there's lots of independent Kurds that are saying, they just don't have the resources right now. But I think your more important point is when the KRG Peshmerga were brought into Turkey, absolutely, they did not want them coming in. And this underlines, really, we can't miss this, the important divisions, I don't care what anybody says, between these groups. They are stronger now than they ever have been, not like the Civil War, but the fact is the PYD and the KDP, whatever, are certainly not operating under a unified command, and each are vying to lead the Kurdish nationalist movement under different leaders in different moments. So there's still divisions and those weaknesses, John. Now, look, at the 2005 Constitution is a disaster. Okay, I think that this was, not only dismembering the Iraqi state, but it left so many ambiguities that the whole idea of revenue sharing and power sharing has been left to different interpretations. The Kurds have their interpretation, the Iraqis, and so forth. So yes, you can say we're just abiding by the Constitution, but then there's so many different articles that contradict each other, particularly over oil, that this is what's gotten it into a mess. I think it's important, we have to at some point stop blaming Maliki. He's gone, okay? The reason that there's no decentralized other areas, it's not just because of Maliki, it's because other regions didn't vote for it. Not all Sunni groups are calling for their own region. There's actually some Sunni groups saying that we want to work with the Iraqi government. We just want more arms. There's some Sunni groups saying that we want some form of decentralization, but we don't want our own region. So this is a myth to think that all of the Sunnis are looking for their own region. And secondly, none of them are calling for separation from Iraq. Now, Anne asked a question about Iran. First of all, having this entity is it going to strengthen Iran? Look, the Iranians won't have it in the first place. Period, end of story. If you think the Iranians have so much influence among the Kurds, and I'm not saying this as this is a bad thing or a good thing, they share a border, they're landlocked and they deal with the Iranians. But this is not a country that is looking weak anytime soon. So I just don't see again how, unless there's some kind of deal that they will become a vassal state of the Iranians, that the Kurds. Still, yeah, it's hard for me to envision this. You're saying that Iraq breaks up and the rest of Iraq becomes, again, this is.
You take the Kurds out of the equation.
I know, but there's this phobia that they're thinking that, well, the Iraqis border Iran. Prime Minister Abadi was in town and he made this very clear in a very succinct message. The Iraqis have to deal with the Iranians. They don't want the Iranians. They don't have this love for the Iranians to intervene in Iraq. There's a strong.
Then there. And that will be the end of our.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Judith Yaffe from George Washington University. I want to endorse what Denise has said, every point, because she's got it absolutely correct. I'd like to go a little bit further than that. The Constitution was meant to be a vague document because nobody wanted to take on the big issues, knowing that everything would collapse if they took on the oil issue or anything else. She's right on what the Sunnis want, but everybody assumes, especially here, they know what the Iraqis or the Kurds or the Sunnis want, and you don't. But the one thing that bothers me most, well, a couple things bother me. First of all, the Kurds, having been strong supporters and drafters of this constitution, have taken the opportunity when they saw it to only accept the parts they want and to take advantage of weakness in Baghdad to seize territory or to move on other areas. That's not very constitutional. I want to know, what will the Kurds do if and the ISIS border involves much more than just Kurdish territory. Will the Kurds fight outside Kurdistan for Iraq, for that so-called federal state that they supposedly supported and helped build? Will they allow a national force, whether it's the National Guard, whatever that's going to mean, if it's created, or any other so-called national force, to position itself inside Kurdish region to protect the Kurds in all of Iraq, which they have not allowed yet? I wish Land for Peace were an option. I just don't see it.
Judith?
No, one more. I want to take this back. You ignored one point. I'm sorry, you ignored one thing. That's the U.S. in this. And you've talked, no, I don't want to talk about halal. The Constitution, that. But because Congress says, oh, the Kurds should be recognized and as independent, and the Sunnis should be recognized as independent, that's not foreign policy, and I don't think it's going to contribute to it because, A, of a lack of understanding, but the other thing is it hasn't been our policy to date. And I wonder if they start to look at politics within Kurdistan, how will they feel about Masoud Barzani trying to go extra constitutionally for a third term and maybe for a lifetime service as president?
Thank you, Judith. Somebody there.
My name's Brenna Allen. I work at RAND. And I just wanted to ask, if the Kurds were able to declare independence, whether through a referendum or some other means, what leverage would Baghdad have to stop them and make that bid a failure?
Beg to differ, where you argue that the Kurds implement parts of the constitution that favour them and parts that they don't. I remember meeting Professor Brendan O'Leary once, and he was... And he
Yes, good. Thank you. Just a couple of points. Brendan, you wrote from RAND, you asked a question about leverage. How many? No, but again, they used to say even during Maliki should declare Kurdish statehood. I mean, because tomorrow, it's not how much leverage does Baghdad have. Like I said, the Iraqis and Shia, Sunni, I don't care. They'll say to the Kurds today, go ahead, you can go have a state. You just can't take the Iraqi oil with you. So it's not about, I don't look at this as, will Baghdad tell the Kurds you can't do it? It's, what will be the arrangements, as Dan said, of what borders will look like. And that's going to have to be a deal made between the Kurds and the Sunnis. Here's a question to ask. What happens if a Sunni region is formed next to the Kurdistan region? What will those borders look like? So I think right now a more salient question would be, how will those resources in those very sensitive areas of Nineveh be shared with the Sunni communities in those areas? Okay, that to me is where it would be. And again, if those two sensitive areas of Kirkuk and Mosul are to me very important. So now, I don't want to get into this about who said what and who did what, decentralization for Iraq, but the fact of the matter is, since 2003, I was just there for about 6 years, this third time, and we used to watch overnight. 2003, they'd go in, and again, there was a security vacuum. We can't forget, Iraq was a mess. The Kurdistan region was relatively stable. The Peshmerga would move in 2 clicks. Then my friends in the security companies would say, oh my gosh, they moved another 2 clicks. So the fact of the matter is, the border has been expanded and expanded over 8 years' time. When you look at where the ISIS threats are occurring right now, it is really no surprise that it's occurring in the disputed territories. And if we look at ISIS as more than sacred values, but angry former Baathists, this area of where it's playing out is, in my view, a lot to do with Kurdish overstep. So, and finally, there has been double standards. Decentralization for Iraq, centralization for Kurdistan. So you can't play it both ways. And this is not coming to me, I'm speaking from me. This comes to me from my Kurdish colleagues. I get dozens of emails, So I'm sorry you're shaking your head and if this is offending you, but the reality of the facts on the ground. I don't work for advocacy group, so this is not emotional. This is about leverage. When we're talking about, I actually find this thing about statehood just remarkable because it's more salient in Washington than elsewhere. How much leverage does the Kurdistan region really have? So you have to ask, where are the resources coming from? Right now, I see the region as more dependent on Baghdad than ever before and dependent on Turkey. So when 95% of your revenues, and not wishing anything, still come from one source, then there's an issue. And even Turkey, working with the Kurdistan regional government, they're selling the oil as Kirkuk crude. how we can realistically be talking about when the Kurdish state's going to happen. It's what kind of compromises are the Kurds willing to take or to make territorially if they want really to have a state. Thank you.
I love to think that 10 years ago, a lot of people thought all these problems had been solved in the new